A woman collapses in a crowded U.S. airport bathroom alone, silent, forgotten. No one notices, except a retired K9 named Rico who refuses to move until help arrives. What they discover: she wasn't just sick, she was running. From a past soaked in secrets and toward a daughter she thought was lost forever. What Rico uncovers will break open a criminal ring and rewrite everything they believed. Like the video, subscribe for more true-to-life emotional stories and stick around because this one, it's not just about survival. It's about loyalty, memory, and the kind of bond no one can fake. The morning rush at the John F. Kennedy International Airport was its usual chaotic symphony. Loudspeaker announcements echoed through the terminal, shoes squeaked on the freshly polished floors, and passengers weaved in and out of queues with wheeled suitcases bouncing behind them. Amid the hustle, a K9 officer named Rico, an experienced German shepherd with 6 years in service, walked diligently beside his handler, Officer Dana Monroe. They had just finished a routine sweep of Gate 27 when Rico suddenly halted, ears perked, nose twitching in midair. Rico heeled Dana, commanded softly, assuming he'd caught the scent of a forgotten snack or a service animal nearby. But Rico didn't move. Instead, his focus narrowed toward the women's restroom to their right. He tugged gently on the leash, his posture low and alert. Something was wrong. Donna hesitated. Rico had never broken protocol in their 3 years together, but now he began pulling harder, whining low in his throat, his nose brushing the base of the restroom door. Passengers turned to look as the K9 began to scratch, then claw at the metal surface with increasing desperation. Dana knelt beside him. "Rico, what is it?" But the dog's body was taut, his hackles slightly raised. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was urgency. Inside the women's restroom, the fluorescent lights flickered above row B. The furthest stall door was locked from the inside. Behind it, a woman named Amina lay slumped on the cold tile floor, half conscious, her breath shallow and uneven. She had collapsed just minutes ago, her vision going black as she reached for her phone. But her phone had slid under the divider out of reach. Her pulse fluttered weakly. Amina, mid-30s with warm brown skin and a neatly tied hijab, had arrived on an international flight just 2 hours earlier. No one had seen her since she excused herself from baggage claim citing dizziness. She never came back. Outside the restroom, Dana's internal radio crackled. "Unit 14, do you copy?" she responded, still keeping her eyes on Rico. "This is 14, go ahead. Security team requesting K9 unit presence at Terminal 3. But Dana cut in her voice, low but firm. "Negative. Possible medical emergency. I need airport medics and female staff at restroom sector C5 now. K9 is signaling strong." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Copy that. Dispatching support." Passengers nearby began murmuring, unsure whether to film or flee. When 2 TSA agents approached, Rico backed off only slightly, but kept his gaze fixed on the stall. Dana turned to the female agent. "We need to get in, now." The agent hesitated. "We're not supposed to. Dana didn't wait. I'll take full responsibility. Something's happening." With a borrowed key and a sharp metallic clunk, the stall door was finally unlocked. What they saw inside stunned them all. Amina's body was curled inward, her left arm bent awkwardly behind her back, one hand clutching at her stomach. Her lips were faintly blue. She was breathing, but barely. Dana dropped to her knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Blink if you can hear me." There was no response, but Rico, tail down, stood perfectly still just outside the stall watching. He let out one long, low bark. Not an alert for drugs or weapons. A warning, a call for help. By the time the EMTs arrived 5 minutes later, Amina's condition had worsened. Her pulse was thready. Suspected hypoglycemia or early stroke, the paramedic muttered, glancing at the glucose monitor. Her blood sugars crashing real bad. She was loaded onto the stretcher with care, an oxygen mask placed over her face. As the stretcher rolled past, Rico sniffed the edge of the blanket. His whine was soft, almost mournful. Later in the staff lounge, Dana sat down heavily. One of the junior officers approached. How'd the dog even know Dana looked down at Rico, who was now lying quietly at her feet? He just did, she said. before anyone else did. She stared at the empty water bottle retrieved from the restroom. The label was still half torn, a cheap energy drink, not enough to cover symptoms of something deeper. She looked at Rico again. He was still watching the restroom door as if something unfinished remained. Across the terminal, passengers resumed their movement. The buzz of announcements continued. But something unseen had cracked that morning, a mystery wrapped in silence and a dog's intuition that refused to be ignored. At first, the incident was met with confusion and escalating tension. After the paramedics wheeled Amina away and the commotion died down, questions began to swirl. Dana sat with Rico near a row of vending machines, her hand resting lightly on his head. He was calm now, breathing steady, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dimmed. He was still alert, still focused on something she couldn't quite define. That's when Officer Bryce Denton, from internal K9 Oversight, stepped into the picture, his expression tight. "We need to talk," he said bluntly. "About Rico." Donna stiffened. "Talk about what?" Bryce didn't sit. He remained standing, arms crossed. "There's a report from a gate agent claiming your dog showed erratic behavior, scratched aggressively at the restroom, barked excessively, and disobeyed orders to stay down." Dana narrowed her eyes. "You saw what we found in there. The woman was seizing." "If we'd waited—" "That's not the point," Bryce interrupted. "Protocol says he shouldn't act without your command. You didn't order him to approach the restroom." Dana stood now, squaring her shoulders. "Because he picked up something I didn't. He's trained for detection. And he detected something." Bryce pulled out a small tablet and flipped through the log. "We've had 3 K9 false alerts in the past month. Public trust is already fragile. I'm recommending a behavioral evaluation for Rico, just routine, but he'll need to be pulled from duty for 72 hours. The words hit Dana like a punch to the gut. "You're grounding him." Bryce didn't answer. He just nodded to the vet tech waiting by the security office. They had a mobile kennel ready. Rico watched the exchange head, tilted slightly, tail unmoving. Dana knelt beside him. "It's just a formality," she whispered. "I'll fix this." He didn't flinch, only leaned his weight gently into her knee. Elsewhere, Amina's condition remained critical but stable. The emergency room staff worked fast running diagnostics, establishing lines, reviewing travel history. It wasn't until Dr. Laura Kim, a neurologist on call, reviewed her CT scan that the full picture emerged. "It's a stroke," she confirmed. "Left hemisphere acute. She's lucky she was found when she was." One of the nurses leaned in. It was a dog, a K9 unit. He found her. Dr. Kim paused, eyes flicking up. "He smelled it," the nurse nodded. "Apparently, he wouldn't stop clawing at the restroom door." Dr. Kim exhaled almost in disbelief. "It makes sense. In some cases, stroke patients exhale acetone or ketones like a fruity 6-sweet scent. It's subtle to us, but maybe not to a trained nose." She turned back to the chart. Either way, someone saved her life. Back at the airport's security division, Rico sat quietly inside the mobile kennel. The air was sterile and unfamiliar. Dana paced outside, her phone pressed to her ear. "Chief Morales, I need you to override Denton's call." Rico didn't make a mistake. The voice on the other end was tired. "Dana, I know you trust him, but if we start excusing protocol every time an officer thinks they're right, we undermine the whole system." Dana's grip tightened on the phone. He smelled a stroke. He reacted before the human systems did, before I did. The woman's alive because of him. There was silence for a beat. "Then we'll review the body cam footage. Until then, he stays off the floor." The line went dead. In the staff lounge, some of the other officers were murmuring about the morning's events. "Did you see how that dog flipped out?" one said. "He almost tore the door off its hinges." Another replied, "Yeah, but he found her, didn't he? EMTs said it was minutes from being fatal." The first officer shrugged. Still, it looked wild. Not like protocol. Dana entered just in time to hear that last word. She cleared her throat. "Rico doesn't need protocol to smell death. He needs you to stop doubting a dog that's been doing this longer than half of you have been out of the academy." The room fell quiet. Meanwhile, in the ICU, Amina began to regain consciousness. Her vision was blurred and her head throbbed, but she could feel warmth around her, a blanket, maybe a hand. Someone was whispering to a nurse, asking if she had identification, but her voice couldn't form yet. She drifted again, her breath shallow. Nurses charted her vitals, noting the steadying heartbeat, the blood pressure rising just enough. They didn't know her story. Not yet. Later that evening, Dana visited the vet station where Rico was being temporarily housed. He perked up immediately when she entered, his tail tapping once against the back of the kennel. She crouched down, resting her head against the metal door. "They think you messed up," she said quietly. "But I know you didn't." Rico watched her in silence. "The woman," she added, "she's gonna make it. You bought her that chance." Still no response. Just breath warm and steady, fogging up a small circle of the kennel glass. Bryce arrived behind her, his expression unreadable. "The medical report confirms it was a stroke. They said early intervention likely saved her cognitive functions." Dana didn't look up. "Are you still grounding him?" Bryce hesitated. "I'm not making promises, but I'm not blind either." She turned her eyes toward him then. He smelled ketones. That's not a malfunction. That's a miracle in fur. Bryce didn't argue. He just nodded once and turned away. Somewhere deep in the hospital's restricted wing, Amina stirred again. Her hands flexed slightly, the IV tape pulling at her skin. A voice nearby said, "She's stabilizing. No ID yet, just a luggage tag with a half-torn name. Could be refugee status." Another voice replied, or something else. In her fading dream, Amina saw a shadow, a door, and a dog's eyes watching her from the dark. Waiting, guarding. The sound of claws on tile, then silence, and something worse. Amina stirred in the stillness of her hospital room, the thin sheets rustling beneath her as she blinked into the sterile light. The humming of machines filled the background, a rhythmic assurance that she was against all odds still alive. Her body ached, her left arm tingled, and her throat felt like sandpaper. But the most overwhelming sensation was confusion, not the clinical kind, but a quieter, deeper fog. She turned her head slowly to the side and saw the soft silhouette of a nurse charting notes. The woman noticed the movement, quickly stepped closer, and offered a warm smile. "You're awake. That's good," she said gently, placing a hand on Amina's shoulder. "You've been through something serious. We weren't sure if you'd come around today." Amina opened her mouth but closed it again. Her voice wouldn't come, not at first. The nurse reached for a small cup of ice chips and offered a spoonful. "Don't force it, just rest." It wasn't until hours later, when the evening shift had swapped in and the monitors had settled into their lullaby rhythm, that Amina finally whispered, Where am I?" A young intern named Miguel stood at the foot of her bed holding a tablet. "You're at Mercy General. You had a stroke. Mild, but significant enough that you lost consciousness. The good news is you're stable. You're safe." Amina didn't respond. Her eyes wandered toward the window, though the view only offered the beige wall of the next building. "Do you remember anything?" Miguel pressed softly. "Your name, where you were headed?" Amina's eyes didn't waver from the wall. "Just water," she murmured. Miguel nodded and retrieved the pitcher. As he poured, he said, "The TSA found your suitcase. No tags, no documents, just basic toiletries and one change of clothes. We ran facial recognition through customs, but there was no match. That's unusual, considering." He trailed off. Amina finally turned her head, her gaze direct. "I don't want to talk about it." Her voice was low but firm. Later that evening, Dr. Laura Kim entered the room, her posture composed but not cold. She took a seat beside Amina's bed. "I'm not the police. I'm not immigration. I just want to understand what your body's been through. Knowing your medical history could help us treat you better." Amina blinked slowly. "No allergies, no surgeries, nothing to tell." Dr. Kim hesitated. "You do understand that in cases like this where a patient arrives unconscious without ID and refuses to identify themselves, it raises certain red flags." Amina nodded, eyes distant. "Let them be read." The doctor leaned back slightly, studying her. There was no aggression in Amina's tone, just exhaustion. A deliberate wall. That night, Dr. Kim returned to her office and wrote in her notes, "Patient displays symptoms of post-traumatic stress." Refuses disclosure. Strong survival instinct. Possible undocumented status or victim of trafficking. Recommend social worker consultation. She closed the file and sat quietly for a moment, remembering the EMT's story that it was a dog who found her. A dog who wouldn't let go of the scent. That detail lingered. In the basement of the hospital in the medical storage area, Amina's suitcase sat quietly on a shelf marked unclaimed. The contents had been logged: one set of clothes, a travel toothbrush still in its plastic, and a small silver necklace with a cracked chain. Nothing more. No wallet, no documents, no name, the kind of suitcase you packed when you planned to disappear. Meanwhile, back at the K9 unit holding facility, Rico remained unusually still, his body curled tightly in the corner of the kennel. The vet assistant noted his lack of appetite and logged it, though she commented aloud to her colleague, "He's not sick, he's waiting for something." She didn't know what, but the dog hadn't taken his eyes off the entrance since morning. Over the next 2 days, Amina began to walk again. Her left side was sluggish, her balance off, but she pushed herself harder than anyone expected. Nurses whispered about her determination, how she refused a wheelchair, how she requested extra time in physical therapy. Yet, despite her physical progress, she remained silent about her past. When the assigned social worker visited, Amina listened but said little. When asked about family, she simply replied, "They're gone." No elaboration. When asked where she was from, she responded, "Does it matter?" Her accent was difficult to place, soft-educated, unplaceable. She used precise English, but the way she curled certain vowels suggested East Africa, maybe Sudan, maybe Eritrea, maybe neither. Hospital security quietly reached out to Homeland Security for background checks just in case. The call came back clean, no match, no flag, no criminal history. The woman was a ghost, legally invisible, and that unsettled them more than if she'd had a record. One evening, Dr. Kim returned to her room again, this time without her lab coat. She brought tea, not medical records. "You don't have to tell me your name," she said. "But someone out there must care about you. You nearly died." Amina stared at the steam curling from the cup. "If someone cared," she said slowly, "I wouldn't have been alone in that stall." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for just a second, her expression broke, but then it returned, controlled, guarded. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, but I don't want any more visits." Dr. Kim didn't argue. She left the tea behind and walked out in silence. That same night, in a dim break room near the airport K9 division, Dana scrolled through her phone, rereading the report from the hospital. "Patient shows signs of isolation and fear," the email said, "maybe avoiding detection." She glanced at the file again. No names, no numbers, just the words, "brought in by K9 unit from Terminal C." Dana looked at Rico, now released from observation but still oddly quiet. "You didn't just smell a stroke," she murmured. "You smelled fear." In the hospital, Amina lay in bed staring at the ceiling tiles. Each one was the same shape, but one in the corner had a tiny crack like something had tried to break through. She found herself staring at it every night, wondering what would happen if it opened. What would come through? What she'd have to face again. The first time Amina returned to the airport was under quiet supervision. The medical team at Mercy General had cleared her for short walks as part of her recovery, and an airport liaison suggested she visit the terminal where she collapsed, part exposure therapy, part gentle closure. The idea wasn't hers, but she accepted it with the same cold neutrality she gave to most things now. She walked slowly through Terminal C, her steps deliberate, the oxygen saturation monitor clipped discreetly to her finger as part of the portable recovery protocol. She wore a simple hoodie hood-up sunglasses, on her posture small despite the open space. The escort from airport services, an older woman named Margot, walked a few paces behind her, giving her space but not leaving her alone. At that same moment, Rico was on a scheduled patrol with Dana. It was meant to be routine, a mid-morning sweep of arriving cargo, then a short pause for hydration and behavioral review. But as soon as they neared Terminal C, Rico's body language shifted. His ears flicked forward, his steps slowed, and he tilted his head as if something far away had clicked into place. Dana noticed immediately. "Rico," she asked, her voice measured. He didn't bark or strain, but his eyes had locked on something down the concourse. Dana followed his gaze and saw a woman in a hoodie slight in frame, standing near the row of windows where light pooled in golden slants. She couldn't see Amina's face, but Rico didn't need to. He began moving toward her, not rushing, but with focused intent. Dana pulled gently on the leash. "Stay," she said firmly. Rico paused, looked up at her, then back at the woman. There was no aggression, no tension, just an unshakable insistence that he needed to reach her. Margot turned just as Rico drew near and started to intervene, but Amina held up a hand. She looked down at the dog, her expression unreadable, and knelt slightly. Rico approached and sniffed the hem of her sleeve, then leaned forward and pressed his head lightly against her knee. Amina didn't flinch. Instead, her hand moved as if by memory to rest on his neck fingers threading through his fur. It was brief, less than 10 seconds, but Dana stood stunned. Rico had never reacted to any civilian like that. Not without precedent. Not with that gentleness. Later, back in the K9 division, Dana reviewed the behavior log and filed it as a non-disruptive contact subject initiated. But it stayed with her. That evening, she shared the footage with an old friend investigator, Reed Sayer, retired Homeland Security liaison, now working freelance cold case reviews. She sent the video without commentary. Reed called her within the hour. "That's the dog from the Eritrean compound, isn't it?" he asked. Dana frowned. What compound? Reed sounded surprised. 2 years ago, border zone sweep near El Paso, a federal sting brought down a migrant holding site disguised as a farm. Rico was deployed for recovery, found 3 live victims and 2 dead within 48 hours. One of the women, she kept touching her neck like it hurt her to speak. She wouldn't talk. Just cried when Rico approached. Same way your girl did. Dana's pulse spiked. "You think this woman, Amina, you think she was there?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "I think that dog doesn't forget what people smell like when they're terrified." Dana returned to the airport the next morning and requested a copy of the internal report from the day of Amina's collapse. She reviewed timestamp security footage, body cam logs, anything that might link Amina to another identity, another life. One line stood out. Subject carried luggage with unusually limited contents consistent with transient travel or undocumented entry. She dug further and traced back the initial response report. Amina had purchased her flight ticket with a prepaid debit card. No name, no passport scanned. The system flagged it as low risk due to lack of criminal markers, but it slipped through because she traveled domestically, not internationally. She had boarded in El Paso. Dana forwarded the new findings to Reed. That evening, he sent her a secure file, an old grainy image from a refugee processing center 2 years ago. It showed a group of women sitting on the floor huddled together. Most faced the camera, their faces blurred from dust and fear. One had her head turned, just slightly, but enough. The slope of her jaw, the small scar near her temple. Dana zoomed in. Then again, the match wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Across town, Amina stood outside the hospital courtyard staring at the rows of small shrubs planted along the iron fence. A nurse approached to check on her vitals, but she waved them away. In her pocket was a folded slip of paper someone had passed her that morning. "You're being watched. If you remember, El Paso, keep walking like you don't." There was no name, just those words. Inside the K9 wing, Rico grew restless. He paced the length of his kennel 3 times, then sat facing the exit, ears pricked. Dana entered just in time to see him tense again. "What do you know that I don't?" She asked aloud, more to herself than him. But Rico didn't move. His eyes were already on the door. It happened just before dawn. The nurse assigned to Amina's floor had made her final round at 4:15 a.m., noting that the patient was asleep, oxygen saturation normal, blood pressure steady. The room light was dimmed to the call button within reach, and the folded sweater Amina always kept at the foot of her bed remained untouched. By 6:10 a.m., when the day shift nurse entered the room with a tray of breakfast and meds, the bed was empty. The covers were pulled back neatly, almost deliberately, and the IV stand stood alone, disconnected and sterile. The only trace of occupancy was a small suitcase left behind in the corner unzipped. Inside, folded atop the other contents, was a man's button-down shirt with dried blood staining the collar and cuffs. The nurse's hand trembled as she hit the panic alert. Security arrived in minutes, followed by Dr. Kim, who stood in stunned silence at the threshold. "She can't have gone far," someone said, but the words felt foolish even as they left his mouth. Amina had vanished without a trace. They checked every camera feed from the last 3 hours, and at first nothing seemed out of place. Elevator footage showed nurses coming and going, janitorial staff mopping silently, one emergency alert patient being wheeled through with 2 paramedics. But it was in the West Service corridor, normally restricted to logistics and supply, that they found what they were looking for. The timestamp read 4:38 a.m. The footage showed Amina in her hospital gown and sneakers, flanked by a man in a black hooded coat. His arm was around her back, not forceful but guiding. Her face was pale, and she kept her gaze lowered. The man didn't look at the camera once. He moved with the certainty of someone who knew where the blind spots were. An hour later, Dana sat in the hospital security room reviewing the footage on loop. The image of the man froze on screen, and Reed, called in again at Dana's request, leaned forward. "Jesus," he muttered. "That's Emil Karza." Dana turned sharply. Reed clicked open his phone and searched through his private notes. Eastern European background, likely Serbian or Croatian, came into the system 6 years ago through a construction subcontractor. Ran fake ID operations, specialized in controlling women in transit, undocumented laborers, refugees, asylum seekers. ICE flagged him 2 years ago, but he slipped through before charges were filed. Last known location, New Mexico, associated with the El Paso ring. Dana's jaw clenched. And now he's here. They ran facial recognition again to confirm. The system pinged within seconds, partial match to Emil Karza alias Marko Todic, flagged under DHS Level 3 threat, but marked inactive due to insufficient evidence. He was known for coercion, psychological manipulation, and soft force, never directly harming, but always controlling. Victims rarely pressed charges. Many couldn't. Most had no legal names to begin with. Dana stared at the frozen frame again. Amina didn't look afraid in the footage. She looked resigned. That was worse. Back at the hospital, Dr. Kim entered Amina's room slowly. She picked up the suitcase with gloved hands and examined the bloodied shirt. It wasn't hers. It was too large, the collar frayed from wear. Inside the side pocket of the suitcase, wrapped in gauze, was a SIM card taped to a piece of paper. Scribbled in shaky handwriting, "If I disappear again, it's him. Don't stop looking." Kim stepped back, heart racing, and immediately called Dana. Later that afternoon, Dana met with airport security to trace any possible exits Karza and Amina might have used. No flights were recorded under their names, but one low-traffic terminal, Terminal G, normally used for private charters, had a log-in gap during the 5:00 a.m. hour. A private van with covered plates was seen pulling up to the security gate. The driver never exited, but the back door opened briefly and 2 figures stepped in. The footage quality was poor, but Rico, standing beside Dana as they reviewed the tape, began to growl low in his throat. "He knows," Dana said under her breath. "He remembers that scent." Rico's hackles didn't raise, but his stance turned rigid, his eyes fixed on the screen like it had betrayed him. Reed spoke quietly. "She didn't leave willingly, not completely. You can see it in her posture. She's been trained to follow him, or threatened into believing it's the only way she survives." Dana nodded. "But she left a clue. That SIM. She knew someone would find it," Reed agreed. "And she left blood. Not hers, probably his. Maybe she fought even a little." Dana turned to Rico. "Then we find her before the trail goes cold. By evening, an all-points bulletin had been issued for Emil Karza, with Amina listed as a potential victim of abduction. DHS was notified, and local law enforcement added pressure to the perimeter search. But no new sightings emerged. It was as if they had evaporated into the dawn. Dana sat at her desk that night reviewing every report from the El Paso case file, cross-referencing locations, methods, contacts. She circled one name repeatedly, a warehouse address tied to a cleaning service that never operated publicly. It had been shut down 2 years ago, but no one ever followed up on the listed secondary location. Outside the precinct, Rico stood beside the cruiser, refusing to get in until Donna opened the back door herself. He climbed inside without a sound, but didn't lie down. He sat upright, alert, facing forward, as if already on the scent again. It began with a sudden shift in Rico's behavior, subtle but unmistakable. The morning after the footage review and the alert on Donna took Rico back to Terminal G to walk the perimeter. They hadn't planned on anything more than revisiting the last known location. But as soon as they passed the North Access Tunnel, a maintenance corridor long since condemned, Rico pulled hard, left nose to the concrete, tail down, posture locked. Dana stopped, looked at the rusted gate that sealed off the old passageway, and felt her stomach tighten. "Rico," she said softly, "what is it?" But he didn't turn back. He scratched once, then began to circle, nose twitching near the base of the metal barrier. Dana called Reed immediately. "Bring bolt cutters and backup." An hour later, Reed arrived with 2 airport operations personnel and a portable lighting rig. The door groaned open reluctantly under the pressure of the cutters, revealing a narrow corridor lined with water stains and exposed wires. The air smelled of old oil and something deeper, something sour. Rico entered without hesitation, his paws silent on the cracked tile. Dana followed, flashlight drawn, her pulse thudding against her collarbone. Reed trailed them, one hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, though he wasn't sure why. "This place hasn't been accessed in years," one of the ops crew muttered. "Was supposed to be sealed after the expansion." "Then explain the footprints," Dana whispered, shining her light across the dust-covered floor. Barely visible, but there they were, faint impressions, adult and child-sized, disturbed within the last 48 hours. Rico stopped abruptly near a junction where the hallway split. He turned sharply left, growled low, and moved toward a stack of wooden panels leaning against a cinder block wall. Dana stepped forward and noticed the unevenness in the structure. It wasn't just junk, it was a crude cover. With Reed's help, she pulled the panels aside, revealing a concealed door, poorly welded and recently used. The handle had scratches. Dana pushed it open. What they found inside wasn't a room, it was a cell. A single cot with no mattress, a bucket in the corner. A stripped electrical outlet, no window. On the far wall, a small piece of fabric clung to a nail part of a child's blanket, frayed and stained. Reed's face darkened. "This is a hold," he said quietly. "Temporary, functional. Meant to break someone down fast." Rico sniffed the floor, then the cot, then padded to the far wall and froze. His nose pressed against the baseboard. He barked once, short and sharp. Dana moved toward him and found what he had alerted to, a small shoe pink and scuffed size 10 for toddlers. The sole was peeling, and on the inside, written in faded ink, was one word: Layla. Dana's breath caught. "Oh my God." Reed leaned in, eyes wide. "You think it's her kid, Amina. Told the hospital social worker she had a daughter named Layla. Said she died during the crossing." Dana replied, voice tight. But what if that wasn't true? Reed didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the shoe like it was radioactive. They logged the scene, photographed everything, and called in forensic techs. But Dana couldn't stop staring at the way Rico hovered near the shoe. Not agitated, protective, like he'd found something more than evidence. She knelt beside him and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You knew it was a lie." Rico pressed his head into her hand. Later that evening, back in the station, Dana pulled up every piece of data she could find on Layla. There was nothing. No birth certificate, no death record, just a line in a hospital intake note: subject reports 1 child deceased, no timeline, no verification. It was a ghost story planted to shield something real. Reed sat across from her, watching the screen flicker. If she lied about the death, he said maybe it was to keep Layla safe. Maybe someone took her and she pretended the girl had died to stop them from searching. Dana's eyes narrowed. Or maybe they made her say it. Maybe Karza used Layla to control her. Reed nodded grimly. He would. They traced the shoe serial number to a small warehouse distributor in New Mexico. Records indicated a shipment sold to a religious shelter near the El Paso border zone 3 years prior. That shelter had since been shut down for health violations. No guest logs survived, but a single donation form remained buried in the digital archives Amina Hassan signed, with a shaky hand listing one dependent, Layla, age 5. The next morning, Dana received a call from one of the forensic officers who had swept the cell. "We found hair strands under the cot," he said. 2 different samples. One adult, one child. DNA's being processed now. Preliminary says both are female and likely related. Dana closed her eyes. It's her daughter. She's alive. Rico began to change, and Dana noticed it almost immediately. He became restless during patrols, often veering off standard routes, nose pressed low to the ground, ignoring commands that once earned him quiet praise. His focus was fractured, his body tense even in stillness. At night, in the quiet of the K9 facility, he paced his kennel obsessively, sometimes growling at nothing, sometimes clawing at the metal grate as if the walls were closing in. The handlers logged the behavior as stress possible overexertion, but Dana knew better. She had seen it before, once years ago in the aftermath of a case that nearly broke both of them. Back then, Rico had been younger, fresh from narcotics, and sent discrimination training assigned to a joint task force along the Arizona border. The mission was vague intelligence suggested a series of moving safe houses, funneling undocumented migrants through desert ranch lands. Rico had alerted on a buried scent during a sweep near a disused cabin. He had dug furiously even after handlers called him off and eventually unearthed a shallow grave. Inside were 2 women, their bodies marked by heat and dehydration, hands still bound. One had a small notebook tucked into her waistband with the words, "He has the children," written in Spanish. The team never found the kids. Rico had refused to leave the site for hours, lying beside the grave, ears flat, refusing food and water. The unit therapist called it trauma imprinting and recommended 6 weeks off duty. The department considered removing him from field service. Dana fought for him to stay. She argued he hadn't failed, he had found them. He had spoken the only way he could. But in her heart, she knew Rico blamed himself for being too late. Now, with Amina gone and the shadow of Karza looming, once again Rico's old wound was tearing open. Dana watched him from across the room one night as he sat before the office door, unmoving, staring at the hallway. She'd called his name twice. No response. He hadn't touched his food. She walked over, knelt beside him, and touched his collar. He flinched. That had never happened before. She whispered, "You remember, don't you?" Rico turned his head, slowly, his eyes dark and distant. "You think it's happening again." That night, Rico began whining in his sleep, his paws twitching against the kennel floor. The sound woke Dana from the cot beside his space. She watched helplessly as he whimpered, trapped in something he couldn't shake. She reached in and gently pressed her hand to his chest, steadying his breath. "We're not too late this time," she whispered. "We're going to find her. Both of them." Meanwhile, Reed reopened the full case file from the El Paso raid, the one Rico had been part of. Dozens of names had been redacted, but he found one report buried deep, a reference to an unidentified female survivor who had escaped mid-transport. She had been carrying a child. Neither were located during the official raid. The description matched Amina. The child had been described as female, 4 to 5 years old, dark eyes, small scar on her chin. The woman had been last seen near a freight train yard with a man matching Karza's profile. The report noted that subjects showed signs of psychological conditioning and potential compliance with captor directives. Reed exhaled slowly. She's been running ever since. Back at the precinct, Dana found Rico chewing on the edge of his training pad, something he hadn't done since puppyhood. His ears twitched at sudden noises. He barked at shadows. When a maintenance worker passed by carrying a duffel bag, Rico lunged forward and snarled another first. It took Donna nearly a full minute to calm him down. "This isn't just stress," she told the department vet. He's unraveling. The vet examined Rico thoroughly but found no physical explanation. His body's fine, but his cortisol levels are spiked. He's reliving something. Dogs with trauma. They don't forget, especially not working dogs. Dana stayed with Rico that night again, this time researching sensory triggers in K9 PTSD cases. The deeper she dug, the more guilt pressed against her ribs. Rico wasn't just reacting to the present. He was chasing ghosts. A few days later, Dana brought Rico to the holding area where they had stored Amina's suitcase. She laid it in front of him and removed the small pink shoe marked Layla. Rico froze. Then he whined. His nose pressed against the fabric and he let out a sound Dana had only heard once before, back when he lay next to those two women in Arizona. It was a sound of grief, recognition, a call for something lost. Rico began refusing food entirely. He sat in his kennel and faced the wall. When officers tried to walk him, he wouldn't leave his spot. Dana finally brought him back to the old maintenance corridor near Terminal G. As soon as they stepped inside, Rico jolted forward, dragging her toward the back hall. He sniffed at every crevice, every piece of rotting wood, pacing and whimpering as though he believed someone was still behind the walls. Dana's chest tightened. "You think they're still here, don't you?" Rico stopped, turned to her, and barked loud, sharp once. Not an alert, not protocol. It was insistence. Reed arrived 10 minutes later with 2 agents and a handheld thermal scanner. "He's not just reacting," Dana said. "He knows." Reed aimed the scanner at the far end of the wall. A faint heat signature pulsed behind one of the vents, just warm enough to suggest recent occupancy. Dana's breath caught. Someone's been using this space again. They found a cigarette butt near the door. Karza's DNA flagged within 20 minutes. They found her in a shuttered motel just outside city limits, checked in under a false name room, paid in cash. It was the motel manager who made the call. A woman staying in room 12 hadn't left in 3 days, and when housekeeping knocked, no one answered. The staff noticed her light came on at night, but otherwise the room stayed eerily still. The responding officer cracked the door and called her name, Amina Hassan, though they weren't sure she'd use it. Inside, they found her sitting in the corner, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, the curtains drawn tight against the daylight. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just blinked slowly, like the world moved too fast and she was struggling to catch up. Dana arrived soon after. She stepped carefully into the room, eyes adjusting to the dim. Amina sat with her knees drawn to her chest, hands folded head low. "You're safe now," Dana said softly. "We have a team ready to take you back to the hospital. You need care. You've lost a lot of weight. You're not well." Amina looked up, then eyes sunken but clear. "No hospital," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, cracked like dry earth. "I want to see him." Dana hesitated. "You mean Rico?" Amina nodded once. "Just him. One time." It wasn't protocol, not even close. Officers weren't supposed to grant visitation to K9 units, especially not outside controlled spaces. But Reed overrode the objection. "This isn't about policy," he told the commanding officer. "This is about trust. She's been through things none of us can write into a report. If seeing that dog gets us a lead or just helps her stay human, then we do it." Dana picked up Rico from the facility herself. He had begun to recover slightly, eating again, responding to commands, but there was a quiet tension in his movements as if his body still braced for something unfinished. When they arrived at the station's side lot, Amina waited beside a bench, arms crossed, sweater pulled tight around her. The moment Rico stepped from the car, his ears perked. He locked eyes with Amina, then approached, slowly, head, low tail wagging, once tentative, then steady. Amina dropped to her knees, and Rico walked right into her arms. She held him close, whispering something in a language Dana couldn't place. Rico stood still, leaning into her shoulder, breathing deep. But then something changed. As Amina shifted slightly, Rico backed away, his nose twitching. He circled her once, then twice. Dana watched confused. "Rico." The dog's attention narrowed to her left side. He stepped closer, pressed his nose into the seam of her sweater, and began to tug, first gently, then with insistence. Amina flinched. "No," she said quietly. "Stop." But Rico didn't stop. He grabbed the hem and pulled hard, revealing a portion of her side. That's when Dana saw it. Just above her hip, under a layer of gauze and medical tape, was a poorly stitched incision, red, inflamed, and unfinished. The skin around it was bruised, the thread uneven. Dana knelt, her hand hovering near it. "What is this?" Amina turned away. "It's nothing." "That's not nothing," Dana snapped. "That's a surgical wound, and it wasn't done in a hospital." Amina said nothing. Rico sat now, still watching, her ears back slightly. Not aggressive, not alarmed, but alert, like he knew what was at stake. Reed arrived minutes later, briefed by Dana over the phone. He crouched beside Amina, his voice low but firm. "They took something from you, didn't they?" She closed her eyes. "I don't know what it was." He said, "It was part of the payment. For what Reed asked, for letting Layla go." Her hands clenched. "He promised if I cooperated they wouldn't hurt her. That I'd be useful, that they'd make something from me." Her voice broke. "I wasn't supposed to survive the surgery, but I did. And I ran." Dana sat back on her heels, stunned. "You're saying they trafficked you for organs." Amina didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Later that evening, a trauma specialist reviewed the wound and confirmed it wasn't clean. "This was done by someone with limited training," he said. "Maybe a field medic. She's lucky to be alive." They started antibiotics immediately, but Amina refused inpatient care. "Just let me rest," she pleaded. "I'll talk tomorrow. But tonight, let me stay with him." She meant Rico. They set up a quiet room at the precinct's wellness wing. Rico curled beside her as she lay on the cot, one hand resting on his back. Her breathing was shallow but calm, like she hadn't slept in years until now. Reed stayed just outside the door, watching through the small window. She knew he murmured to Dana, "She's known everything for a long time." But she kept going. For that kid. Dana nodded slowly. And Rico, he found what no one else could, again. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of Rico's breathing beside the cot. Amina lay curled under a light blanket, her eyes, half-closed body still recovering from the infection and the trauma. Dana sat across from her, notebook open but untouched. She hadn't asked any questions yet. She didn't need to. Amina spoke first, her voice brittle and dry. "I never meant to survive it," she said. "The surgery, I mean. It was supposed to be the end. My debt paid my daughter safe. They told me if I let them take what they needed, they'd send Layla to a shelter far from here. New name, new papers. I didn't even ask where." Dana leaned forward slowly. What dead Amina didn't look at her. She stared at the ceiling as if the words could only come out if she avoided all eyes. 2 years ago, I crossed the border with Layla after our camp in Al-Hudaydah was bombed. I was trained as a nurse back home. Nothing special, just emergency response. When we reached El Paso, we were picked up by Karza's people. He saw me stitching a child's wound at the shelter. That's when it started. He said I owed him for bringing me over, for keeping Layla alive for the meals. And I paid with my hands. Reed stood near the door, arms folded, his jaw locked tight. "They made you operate." Amina nodded. At first, just assisting, cleaning instruments, keeping patients sedated. Then they asked me to do small procedures. Sutures, monitoring vitals. One day it was kidneys, the next livers. She swallowed hard. I told myself I was just surviving, that I didn't have a choice, but I did, and I chose wrong for too long. Dana's pen hovered unmoving. What changed, Amina finally looked at her, a girl, maybe 15. She didn't speak, she just cried. They said she'd been prepped ready for removal. I stood beside her and felt my hands go cold. I told them her vitals were unstable, that we couldn't proceed. They didn't believe me. One of the men slapped her until she stopped crying. I couldn't move. That night I took Layla and we ran. They caught us before we got far. She paused, blinking back tears. They separated us. Said they'd keep Layla as insurance. And that if I tried to escape again, she'd disappear forever. After that, I did what they told me. For months, until the raid. Reed stepped closer. The El Paso compound, Amina nodded. We were told to move to another location. The feds were closing in. That night I hid in a storage unit. Rico was there. He passed within inches of me. I thought he would alert, but I masked the scent with alcohol. He kept moving. I never forgot his eyes. Dana whispered he was there too. That's why he remembered you. Amina's lips trembled. I never saw Layla again. They told me she was dead, that she'd gotten sick. I believed them. I couldn't fight anymore. So I waited. And when Karza brought me here again, I knew it was ending. That's why I staged the collapse. I knew if I dropped at the airport, they'd have to take me to a hospital. Maybe someone would help me. Maybe I could find a way out. Reed stepped forward. You faked the stroke. Yes, she admitted. I had learned how to trigger a fainting episode, how to hold my breath just enough, how to mimic disorientation. I even rubbed ketone cream beneath my nose and mouth to alter my breath. Dana stared in disbelief. You faked the symptoms so well that even the doctors believed Amina closed her eyes. I was trained to hide pain. I used what I knew. I needed them to take me away from him, from the van. And it worked. But I didn't expect him. She looked down at Rico, still curled beside her. He sniffed me once, and everything shattered. Donna sat back in her chair, overwhelmed, so the scent, the one he caught, it wasn't just illness. It was that place. The room, the surgical tools, the blood. Amina nodded. It stays with you. You try to scrub it out, but you never forget. And neither did he. Reed took a deep breath. You understand what this means, don't you? Your testimony, it changes everything. If you're willing to talk to testify, we can build a case. Real charges, real consequences. You could help find the others. Amina looked up at him, a flicker of something ancient and heavy in her gaze. Only if you promise me one thing. Anything Dana said. Find Layla. If she's alive, I need to know. I'll say whatever you want. But you find my daughter. They followed Rico through the overgrown lot behind the airport's freight zone, a strip of land that hadn't seen maintenance since the expansion 5 years earlier. The air was thick with humidity and the sour scent of rotting metal, but Rico moved with purpose, weaving between forgotten crates and rusted fencing until he stopped before a corrugated steel warehouse, its lock long since broken and replaced with a crude chain. Dana stepped forward, signaling for silence, and Reed gave the order to hold until thermal imaging could sweep the perimeter. Inside, the device registered 4 bodies, 3 adult-sized, 1 small, huddled together in the far corner of the structure. Dana felt her heart leap. Reed nodded. We breach in 2. The door came down with a crash. Officers swept the space with the controlled force voices sharp and focused rifles angled low to avoid hitting the terrified occupants inside. What they found stunned even the most seasoned responders. 3 women, barefoot, shivering eyes swollen from sleep deprivation, and 1 small girl curled in the arms of the youngest woman, her face hid in arms wrapped tight around her doll. The child didn't scream. She only blinked up at the light as if sunlight were something she had forgotten how to see. One of the women pointed at her and whispered Layla. Dana knelt beside her, her voice trembling. Layla, Hassan. The girl nodded once lips pressed tight. Rico moved forward, gently sniffed her hand, and then leaned his head into her shoulder. The girl didn't flinch. She reached up slowly and touched his ear. You came back, she said. Back at the precinct, Amina was told the news through the glass of an observation room. Her breath hitched, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When the photograph of Layla, wrapped in a thermal blanket, cradled in Dana's arms, was placed on the table, Amina reached for it, like a starving woman reaching for food. She's alive, she whispered. Reed nodded. She asked for you. Amina sobbed quietly, clutching the image to her chest. She didn't ask about her future. She didn't ask what would happen next. She only said, thank you. In the days that followed, a coordinated raid across 4 states dismantled the remnants of the trafficking network Amina had described. Her testimony, combined with forensics and Rico's behaviorally verified alerts, built a case that prosecutors called the most detailed internal witness account in modern anti-trafficking enforcement. Amina was placed under federal protection and quietly transported to an undisclosed location where she would await trial, not as a criminal, but as a cooperating witness under immunity for her previous role. The media never knew her name. Her face never made the news. But inside the walls of Homeland Security, she was called the Key. As for Layla, she was placed with a specialized foster care program while psychological evaluations were conducted. But she asked about her mother daily. She spoke little, but when she did, it was often to ask where Rico was. Dana arranged for him to visit once a week during supervised sessions. The first time they brought him into the center, Layla ran to him without hesitation, arms wide, laughter catching in her throat for the first time since she'd been found. The therapist made a note trauma recovery bond initiated. Recommend continued contact. Rico was officially honored in a ceremony hosted by the Department of Justice 3 weeks later. The citation read, "For exemplary service in the field demonstrating not only tactical precision but emotional intelligence beyond training. Recognized for the recovery of 4 victims and the identification of a primary informant. Cited for loyalty, memory, and perseverance." He didn't understand the applause or the cameras, but when Dana knelt beside him and whispered, "You did it," he wagged his tail once and leaned into her chest. In the years that followed, Amina disappeared into the folds of the protection program. Some said she was given a new identity and now worked as a nurse at a remote clinic. Others said she relocated abroad. No one knew for sure, but every year, without fail, a small envelope would arrive at the K9 unit's mailroom. No return address, just a child's drawing inside. Always the same subject, a little girl, a brown dog, and a bright blue sky. If this story moved you, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps bring more real emotional stories like this to life. What part hit you the hardest? Was it Rico's memory, Amina's sacrifice, or Layla's quiet strength? And by the way, where are you watching from, Drop? A comment below, I'd love to know.